Everyone said drones would kill the Javelin in Ukraine. Well, the Javelin didn't get the memo. Here's a number that should stop you cold. 500,000. That's what India paid per Javelin missile in its first order of last year. $500,000 per missile for a weapon that, once fired, is gone forever. No recovery, no reuse, no returns policy. It's a one-way transaction with a tank on the receiving end. And yet, Lockheed Martin can't build them fast enough. Global demand is up, the supply chain is running at full sprint, and every defense analyst who's spent 2023 writing FPV drones will replace anti-tank missiles is currently very quiet about that take. Let's talk about why the Javelin is still one of the most important weapons on Earth, why drones haven't buried it, and what the future of anti-armor warfare in Ukraine actually looks like, because Ukraine is still using the Javelin today. Hey friends, Wes here. Infantry veteran, Air Force veteran, and a man who once watched a St. Javelin missile turn a T-72 into a very expensive campfire from about 2 kilometers away. So like I said, Ukraine is still using the Javelin. In a February 3rd, 2026 report about fighting near Pokrovsk, there is hidden below an image caption that explicitly says, quote, Javelin operator works against enemy equipment, tied to comments from a National Guard officer about current frontline fighting. There's also a March 20 Army Inform feature that improvised Ukrainian pickup combat vehicles that says pickups carrying a Stugna P or a Javelin can rapidly reposition, fire, and disappear. So we have evidence that they're still putting in work. But first, let's do a quick primer for anyone who's new here, because anti-tank guided missile covers a lot of ground and the Javelin is a specific animal. The FGM-148 Javelin is a fire-and-forget man-portable anti-tank guided missile that's been in U.S. service since 1996, I think. Fire-and-forget means exactly what it sounds like. You lock the seeker onto the target, pull the trigger, and then you can move. The missile flies itself to the target using infrared imaging. You don't have to stand there holding a laser on the tank while someone tries to shoot you. You shoot and your Oscar mic. That matters more than almost any other feature because the alternative, older wire-guided systems where the operator had to maintain sight of the target during the entire flight, means staying exposed for up to 12 seconds while a tank crew and everyone around them is actively trying to kill you. The Javelin also attacks from above, arcing up and then plunging down onto the top of the tank, which is the thinnest, least armored part of the vehicle. Now, most tanks are built to resist frontal fire. The Javelin doesn't care about your frontal armor. It goes over the roof and through the engine compartment, which is a rude way to end tank crew's day. Ukraine demonstrated this so effectively in the early months of the war that the Javelin briefly became a cultural icon. There were Javelin candles, Javelin prayer cards with St. Javelin printed on them, a Ukrainian folk saint holding an anti-tank missile. That's how well it worked against Russian armor columns that tried to push on Kyiv in February 2022. So, if the Javelin is so effective, why is anyone questioning its future? Well, because FPV drones happened. A first-person view drone modified to carry an explosive warhead costs somewhere between $300 and $1,000, depending on how fancy you want to get. Javelins cost about $200,000 per shot, depending on who's buying. That's not a slight difference in price, that's a difference in kind, and it changes the doctrinal mass significantly. Now, Ukraine figured out that you can take out a tank with a kamikaze FPV drone for roughly the price of a decent used car. Russia figured this out too, and both sides are now fielding FPV drones by the tens of thousands, and the footage of armored vehicles getting destroyed by small commercial drones is all over Telegram and YouTube. So the question being asked in defense ministries and on think tank panels is a legitimate one. If a $500 drone can kill a $3 million tank, why are we spending $500,000 on a Javelin missile? It's a fair question, but it also misunderstands how war actually works, and I want to be precise about why. FPV drones are brilliant weapons under specific conditions. They need a trained operator with line of sight or reliable video feed. They're vulnerable to electronic jamming. They're affected by weather. They're relatively slow, which means a moving tank with any situational awareness can complicate the engagement geometry. And they require a supply chain of commercial components that's increasingly being disrupted on both sides. The Javelin operates under a different condition set and solves different problems. Its seeker locks on to the thermal signature of a target, like the heat a tank engine puts out, and the missile flies that lock to impact without any further human input and without any radio link to jam. There's no signal to spoof, there's no video feed to cut, there's no operator thumb on a joystick at the moment of truth. Once it's in the air, electronic warfare is irrelevant. You can jam every frequency on the battlefield and the Javelin still hits. It also has a maximum range of about 4,750 meters, nearly 3 miles, and well outside the range at which a tank crew can engage an infantry position. That standoff difference is the difference between a survivable firing position and a suicide mission. And the warhead is in a different class entirely. A Javelin's tandem-shaped charge warhead is specifically engineered to defeat explosive reactive armor, the bolt-on armor packages that Russia tries to use to protect its tanks against exactly this kind of attack. Now, most FPV drones, even modified ones, struggle against reactive armor. The Javelin was designed from the ground up to punch right through it. So what you actually have is two different tools solving overlapping but not identical problems. FPV drones are high-volume, low-cost weapons for close engagements against vehicles that are stationary or slow-moving in conditions where jamming isn't saturating the spectrum. Javelin, though, is a low-volume, high-confidence weapon for longer-range engagements against hardened targets in environments where you need the kill chain to be completely self-contained. And this isn't theoretical. As I mentioned, Ukraine is still using the Javelin right now in Pokrovsk, even after the rise of FPV drones, even after the flood of cheap loitering munitions. Ukrainian forces still keep dedicated anti-tank missiles in the fight because there are still moments when you need range, penetration, and a high-confidence kill against armored targets under ugly battlefield conditions. Drones definitely changed anti-armor warfare. They did not, though, replace every weapon that came before them. Good armies still use both. Smart armies don't bet everything on either. Now, about that supply chain. Lockheed Martin's Javelin program involves roughly 100 component suppliers and 25 major subcontractors. When demand spiked after Ukraine, that entire network had to accelerate simultaneously. Each supplier implemented upgrades within 8 to 10 months to increase output. Lockheed is now targeting a 52-week maximum delivery times for all components and building strategic reserves of critical parts so the next demand spike doesn't catch them flat-footed. That's probably a serious industrial undertaking. For comparison, before the war in Ukraine, the US was producing somewhere around 2,100 Javelin missiles per year. The estimate at the time was that Ukraine was using that many in a matter of days during the heaviest fighting. Now, the gap between production rate and consumption rate was stark and sobering, and the defense industrial base has been playing catch-up ever since. There's also genuinely interesting technology work happening underneath the program. Firehawk Aerospace ran tests last year using solid rocket motors with 3D printed parts for Javelin and for Stinger missiles as well. They also did 3D printed fuel. Yeah, 3D printed propellant sounds like something out of a defense contractor's marketing deck, but the practical implication is faster production, lower cost, and the ability to manufacture rocket motors without some of the specialized tooling that creates bottlenecks in conventional production. If that scales, it changes the whole economics of the whole system. And then there's Israel's L-Spike 4X, which can probably be accurately described as closer to a traditional drone than a traditional missile. 6th generation ATGM precision guided with a seeker system that essentially gives it the targeting flexibility of an autonomous weapon. That line between anti-tank missile and loitering munition is dissolving, and the next generation of systems will probably straddle that distinction entirely. So here's the strategic picture underneath all of this. The world just watched Russia lose thousands of armored vehicles in Ukraine. That footage circulated in every defense ministry on Earth, and the reaction wasn't, well, tanks are dead, we'll just buy more drones. The reaction was, we need better anti-drone systems, we need them in larger quantities, and we need them now. Because if a large mechanized force comes at us, we want to be able to stop it. That's why India signed a Javelin order at $500,000 per missile. That's not a country unconcerned with cost. India is a country that looked at what happened to Russian armor in Ukraine and decided that having a credible anti-armor capability, especially against China, was worth the price tag. That's also why Poland has been on a sustained buying spree of anti-armor systems. That's why Baltic states that might face a Russian armored push across a flat border are stocking up. The war in Ukraine didn't make ATGMs obsolete. It reminded every country with a land border near Russia exactly how important they are. The Javelin specifically benefits from something that most defense systems don't have: a 3-decade track record of actual combat performance. Iraq, Afghanistan, Ukraine, it has worked in the desert heat, mountain cold, and European mud. Procurement officers like certainty, and the Javelin has more combat validation than almost any other system in its class. Every few years, someone announces that a new technology has made an old weapon system irrelevant. Sometimes they're right, often they're not, because warfare is a system of systems, and the thing that seems redundant in one scenario can be indispensable in another. The Javelin isn't going to disappear because FPV drones exist. It's going to coexist with FPV drones in the kit bag of every serious military on Earth, filling the engagement spaces that drones can't reliably cover, and doing it with a fire-and-forget certainty that doesn't exist anywhere else in the anti-armor toolkit. Lockheed is building more of them. The supply chain is accelerating. The propellant technology is advancing. New seekers and warhead packages are in development. And somewhere in eastern Ukraine right now, there's a soldier in a tree line with a javelin on his shoulder watching a Russian tank through a thermal sight, about to make a very expensive decision on behalf of a very justified cause. That soldier doesn't care about the price per shot debate. He cares that when he pulls the trigger, it works. And it will. That's it for today, my friends. I just launched channel memberships for those of you who'd like to support these videos more directly. We're building the best global security community on YouTube. If not, no worries. I know money is tight. Oil prices are skyrocketing. Thanks to Gulf War III, the search for more oil. I know you can't pay a subscription to everything, but the basic subscribe here is free, so consider it. And as always, glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes. Crimea is Ukraine.